Have you ever wondered if a soul, once broken, can ever truly heal? Can a creature born into violence learn to love again? And what if the only person who believed in that redemption was someone who couldn't even see? Tonight, on Veil Marks, we bring you a story that will shake you to your core. A story of an abandoned giant Pitbull left behind as a forgotten fighter, and a blind girl who refused to see him as anything other than a heart in need of healing. But before we begin, if you enjoy stories that touch the heart and stir the soul, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to Veil Marks. We're on the journey to 1,000 subscribers, and your support means the world. It is your encouragement that fuels these stories, inspiring us to create even deeper, more powerful narratives that bring meaning to our lives. This is not just a tale about survival. It is about trust, redemption, and the choices that define us. Stay with us until the very end, because within these moments, you may just find a lesson that changes the way you see the world. Now, let's begin. The warehouse reeked of sweat, blood, and decay. A single flickering bulb hung from the ceiling, casting weak yellow light over the rusted metal cages lining the walls. The air was thick with the scent of damp concrete and something far worse, something metallic, something primal. It clung to everything, seeping into the cracks of the stained floor, soaked into the wooden posts where countless bodies had been thrown against them. Somewhere in the distance, a dog whimpered, a high-pitched, pitiful sound that was quickly silenced by a guttural growl. Atlas lay curled in the farthest cage, his massive body half hidden in the shadows. The cold metal pressed against his side, but he barely noticed. His ribs rose and fell in slow, measured breaths, but his mind was far from still. He remembered the first time he had been shoved into this hell. Back then, his coat had been smooth, his muscles lean but unscarred. He had been dragged into the ring, a heavy chain clamped around his thick neck, cutting into his skin as the handler yanked him forward. The lights had been blinding, the crowd deafening, a sea of faces screaming, demanding violence. Across from him stood another dog, just as scared, just as confused. Their eyes met for a brief moment, a silent exchange of terror. Atlas had taken a step back, his tail tucked between his legs. He didn't want this. He didn't understand. Then came the first lash of the whip. Pain exploded across his back, a sharp, searing burn that sent shockwaves through his body. He yelped, flinched, but didn't fight back. Another strike, then another. Fight! The voice had come from somewhere above, a faceless command, filled with disgust. Atlas had turned desperate, searching for an escape, but there was none. A fourth lash, harder this time, slicing across his ribs. The crowd roared, their bloodlust rising. Fight or die. The other dog had lunged first, not out of aggression, but fear. Teeth met flesh, a flash of pain as Atlas felt jaws clamp onto his shoulder. Instinct took over. His own teeth found their mark. The warmth of blood spread across his tongue. The next few seconds were a blur of snarls and tearing flesh, bodies hitting the dirt, the coppery scent of fresh wounds mixing with the sweat of 100 screaming men. When it was over, he was still standing. The other dog wasn't. That was the night Atlas learned the truth. There was no escape, no mercy, no second chances. You fought or you died. And so he fought, again and again, until the whip was no longer needed, until the fear in his chest had hardened into something else, something cold, something unbreakable, until he could barely remember a time before the bloodshed. But the memories had never truly left him. Lying in his cage now, he could still hear the crowd, still feel the sting of old wounds that had long since healed. The scars stretched across his body, a permanent map of his past. Each one told a story. Each one was a reminder of what he had been forced to become. Then, one night, the world changed. The first sign was the sirens, shrill, piercing, cutting through the thick air like a blade. The handlers panicked. Yelling erupted from the front of the warehouse, followed by the unmistakable sound of heavy boots pounding against concrete. Atlas lifted his head, ears pricked. A deafening crash, splintering wood, shattering glass. Shadows moved beyond the bars of his cage, human figures storming in, their voices sharp, commanding. The scent of fear spiked in the air. The handlers were dragged away, their protests turning into desperate curses. One of them, the man who had trained Atlas, who had held the whip in his hand every night, shouted something before being slammed against the floor. A second later, a pair of metal cuffs clicked into place around his wrists. Atlas did not move. One by one, the cages were opened. Other dogs were let out, some hesitantly, others running, tails wagging as they found gentle hands reaching out to them. He watched as a young officer knelt beside a trembling golden retriever, whispering soothing words as she unhooked its chain. Another officer carried a limping terrier into his arms, cradling it as if it were a newborn. Atlas remained where he was. Minutes passed. One of the rescuers, a man in a dark uniform, approached his cage, clipboard in hand. He glanced down at Atlas, then up at the handler being shoved into the back of a police van. "What about this one?" another rescuer asked. The man checked his notes, then frowned. "Pitbull, fighter," he said flatly. "Unadoptable." The other rescuer hesitated. "Are we sure?" The others. "This one's different." The man shook his head. "He's been in the ring too long. Nobody's going to take him." Atlas didn't react. He had heard those words before. The key never turned in his lock. By morning, the warehouse was empty. The handlers were gone. The other dogs had been taken to safety, given new homes, new names. Atlas remained in his cage, the last prisoner of a war he had never wanted to fight. He lay down, resting his head on his paws. His body was still, but his eyes stayed open, staring at the rusted bars in front of him. He had won every battle they had thrown at him, but somehow he had still lost. And as the sun rose outside, casting its pale light through the cracks in the walls, Atlas remained in the darkness. The warehouse was silent now. The lights had been shut off, the handlers long gone. But Atlas remained. Hours passed. Then a group of rescuers returned. They moved quickly, carrying the last remaining dogs to their vehicles. One by one they disappeared, whisked away to safety, to new beginnings. Then there was only Atlas. A man knelt beside his cage, reading something from a clipboard. "What about this one?" Another rescuer hesitated. "He's different. He's been in the ring too long." Atlas watched as the man sighed and rubbed the back of his neck. "We can't just leave him here. Bring him in, but separate from the others." And so, for the second time that night, Atlas was loaded into a cage. This time, not to fight, but not to be saved either. The truck rumbled to life. The journey to the shelter was long, filled with the unfamiliar hum of tires on asphalt and voices murmuring in hushed tones. Atlas did not sleep. When the doors finally opened again, he was somewhere new. The air was sterile, the walls lined with metal enclosures. He was placed in the farthest corner, away from the hopeful barking of dogs that would soon find homes. This was not freedom. This was another waiting cage. And once again, Atlas was alone. The scent of antiseptic lingered in the air, blending with the faint traces of wet fur and old wood. The animal shelter was quiet, save for the occasional rustling of paws against the cold tile floor. Metal cages lined the walls, each containing a dog with a different story. Some hopeful, tails wagging as visitors passed by, others curled into themselves, waiting for something they no longer believed would come. And then she walked in. Lily stepped carefully through the doorway, her movements smooth but measured, the white cane in her hand tapping gently against the ground. She was young, no more than 20, but carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had learned to navigate the world differently. Her eyes were striking, a deep shade of hazel that held an unnatural stillness. They didn't follow the motions of the people around her, didn't dart toward the sound of a barking puppy or a shifting cage door. She didn't see, but she felt everything. The other visitors instinctively avoided the farthest row of cages, the section reserved for the dogs labeled unadoptable. Dogs with histories too violent, too unpredictable, too broken. Atlas was in the last cage. He had been there for months, watching as dog after dog found their way to new homes, watching as hands reached out to scratch ears, to ruffle fur, to offer treats and soft words. But never for him, never for the dog with a past soaked in blood, and yet this girl, the one who couldn't even see him, was walking toward his cage. The shelter worker hesitated. "Miss, that one's not—" "I'd like to meet him," Lily said, her voice gentle but firm. The worker glanced at Atlas. He lay still in the corner, his massive body stretched across the worn-out blanket, his scars catching the dim light. His golden brown eyes flickered toward the girl, unreadable. The worker sighed but stepped aside, allowing Lily to take a cautious step forward. She was close now, close enough that Atlas could smell her, warm, soft, carrying the faintest hint of lavender. Lily knelt, reaching out, her fingers barely brushing against the cool metal bars. Atlas tensed. He had learned what human hands could do. The crack of a whip, the sting of a chain, pain always followed touch. He had grown used to flinching before the impact, but this girl, she wasn't like the others. She didn't hesitate, didn't pull away. She simply let her fingertips rest against the bars as if waiting for permission. Atlas didn't move. Slowly, Lily reached her hand further inside. Her fingers found his fur, thick, coarse, marred with the raised ridges of old scars. Atlas jerked. His muscles coiled like a tightened spring, breath hitching as a primal instinct screamed at him to retreat, to snarl, to protect himself. But there was no pain, no whip, no chain, no harsh command, only warmth. Her hand rested lightly on his head, fingers threading through the fur between his ears. A simple touch, a quiet moment. Atlas didn't know what to do. For years, every human he had known had demanded something from him: violence, obedience, submission. He had been touched before, but never like this. Never with patience, never with kindness. Lily tilted her head, as if listening to something unspoken. "They say you're scary," she murmured. "But I don't feel that." Atlas swallowed. "I just feel a heart that's afraid," she whispered. Something inside him shifted. He didn't understand these words. He didn't understand why this girl, who couldn't even see the scars crisscrossing his body, spoke to him as if she knew him. He should have pulled away, should have turned his back and buried his head between his paws, the way he always did when someone came too close. But he didn't. For the first time in years, Atlas remained still. The worker watched in quiet astonishment. That's the first time he hasn't backed away from someone." Lily smiled. "Maybe he's just been waiting for the right person." Atlas lowered his head slightly, his eyes locked onto the girl kneeling before him. There was something in her presence that made his chest ache. Something unfamiliar, but not entirely unwelcome. She didn't see him, yet she understood him in a way no one else had. For the first time, he wondered what it might feel like to be chosen, to belong to someone who didn't fear him, to have a second chance. The first night in Lily's home was the longest of Atlas's life. The room was quiet, too quiet. There was no echo of distant growls, no heavy scent of blood-soaked dirt, no rusted chains scraping against concrete, no angry voices commanding him to move, to fight, to obey. The silence was unnatural, and it unsettled him more than the chaos he had grown accustomed to. He had been placed in a soft bed, something too foreign to feel real beneath him. The blanket was thick, warm, carrying the faint scent of lavender and something else, something gentle. But Atlas did not lie down. He remained crouched in the corner, his golden brown eyes scanning the unfamiliar space. His ears twitched at every sound, the hum of the refrigerator, the creak of the wooden floorboards beneath his weight. He was not used to stillness. Lily sat across the room, cross-legged on the floor. She was different from every human Atlas had ever encountered. Unlike the others, she did not expect anything from him. She didn't demand affection, didn't pull at his leash or try to force his trust. She simply existed beside him, a quiet presence in the dim glow of the bedside lamp. As the night deepened, she spoke. Not to him, not to anyone in particular, but to the room, to the air, to the stars beyond the window. "I used to be afraid of the dark," she admitted, running her fingers along the spine of a book she could never read. "Ironic, huh? A blind girl afraid of the dark." Atlas flicked an ear, listening despite himself. "I guess it's not really the dark that scared me," Lily continued. "It was the feeling of not knowing what was around me, not knowing if I was alone, if I was safe." She smiled faintly, though her unseeing eyes remained fixed on nothing. "But then I realized something. I don't have to see everything to understand it. Sometimes you just have to trust that the world won't hurt you." Atlas remained motionless. Trust. The word meant nothing to him. As the hours stretched on, Lily kept talking. She told stories of the places she had never seen, of towering mountains she had only felt through the descriptions of others, of oceans that roared like distant thunder, of fields where the grass danced beneath the wind. She painted the world with words, weaving images that Atlas couldn't grasp, but still, he listened. Sometime before dawn, sleep found him. Not fully, not deeply, but enough for his body to ease into something resembling rest. But the peace was short-lived. It started as it always did, with the echoes of the past clawing their way into his mind. The cage, the whip, the snarling teeth of another dog lunging toward him. The suffocating roar of the crowd, the pressure of the chain tightening around his throat. The fight, the blood, the pain. Atlas jerked awake, his breath ragged, muscles coiled, his body ready for an attack that wasn't coming. But something was different. A hand rested lightly on his head. Not rough, not forceful, just there, present, grounding. Lily's voice, soft and steady, whispered through the fog of his panic. "It's okay," she murmured, her fingers tracing soothing circles against his fur. "You're safe here." Atlas swallowed hard, the tension in his frame slowly unraveling. No one had ever spoken to him like that before. No one had ever stayed after the nightmares. That was the first night he let her touch him without flinching. The days that followed were slow, quiet. Lily never rushed him. She never forced him to come when she called. Instead, she let him choose. If he wanted to stay in his corner, she let him. If he wanted to sit at her feet while she read aloud, she welcomed him without question. Little by little, the walls Atlas had built around himself began to crack. One morning he followed her to the porch, settling beside her as she sipped her tea. Another day, he let her fingers graze his scarred shoulder without pulling away. It wasn't trust, not yet, but it was something close. And then, one afternoon, everything changed. Lily stood by the front door, leash in hand, but she hesitated. Then, in a quiet act of defiance against the fear the world had instilled in both of them, she let the leash fall away. "Let's go for a walk," she said simply. Atlas stiffened. He had never known freedom beyond the confines of a leash. Every time he had stepped outside, a handler had been there, yanking, pulling, controlling. Without the leash, without the force, what was he supposed to do? Lily took the first step, then another. Atlas remained where he was, his heart pounding. This wasn't right. This wasn't how it was supposed to be. If she wasn't holding the leash, then he was free to leave. But she never called him. Never begged him to follow. She simply walked. And without knowing why, Atlas followed. They moved through the quiet streets, the autumn breeze rustling the leaves along the pavement. Lily walked with the same confidence she always did, her cane tapping lightly in front of her. But she never reached for him, never tried to control him. People stared. A pit bull walking beside a blind girl without a leash, it was unheard of. A few whispered, their voices laced with warning. "That dog is dangerous." "What if it turns on her?" Lily didn't react. If she heard them, she gave no sign. Atlas didn't react either. He could have bared his teeth, could have proven them right. But he didn't. He just walked beside her. For the first time in his life, he made the choice. Not out of fear, not out of obedience, but because he wanted to. By the time they reached the house again, something inside him had shifted. He didn't know what it was, didn't have a name for it. But as Lily knelt beside him, running her fingers along his ear, he did something he had never done before. He leaned into her touch. Lily smiled, her unseeing eyes shining with something Atlas couldn't quite understand. "See?" she whispered. "No leash, no chains, just trust." Atlas exhaled, closing his eyes. For the first time in his life, he understood what that word meant. The afternoon air was crisp, tinged with the golden hues of early autumn. Leaves crunched beneath Lily's feet as she walked along the familiar path home, the rhythmic tapping of her cane filling the silence between her and Atlas. He moved beside her with quiet confidence, his heavy paws barely making a sound against the pavement. It had become their routine, these walks through the neighborhood, the leash abandoned in favor of trust. Atlas had learned to match her pace, to sense the subtle shifts in her direction. He no longer hesitated at passing cars or stiffened at the murmurs of strangers. He was learning. He was adapting. But the past had a way of creeping up when least expected. The scent hit him first. Sharp, acrid, unfamiliar. A presence lurking ahead just beyond the bend in the road. His ears flicked forward, muscles tensing beneath his thick coat. The rhythm of Lily's steps remained steady, unaware of the danger waiting in their path. And then it happened. A shadow moved. Quick, deliberate. A rough hand snatched at Lily's purse, jerking it violently from her shoulder. She stumbled backward, the force nearly pulling her off balance. Atlas reacted before thought could intervene, his body coiled, his stance shifting into something primal. A deep growl rumbled from his chest, low and thunderous, sending vibrations through the ground beneath him. The world narrowed to a single target, the man in front of them, the intruder, the threat. The thief froze, his grip on the purse tightening, but his gaze locked onto something far more terrifying. Atlas was no longer the silent companion padding beside a blind girl. He was something else entirely. His lips curled back, revealing teeth honed by survival, by battles fought in blood-stained pits. His hackles rose, ears pinned flat against his skull. His breath came heavy, controlled, as every muscle in his body prepared for a strike. And for the first time in a long time, he heard it again. That silent command, unspoken yet ingrained in his bones. Fight. The leash was gone, but the chains of the past had never truly broken. The instinct remained, the old hunger for battle simmering just beneath his skin. It would be so easy, so simple, to lunge forward, to sink his teeth into flesh, to remind the world what he had been made for. But then, a hand on his head. Software, warm, steady. The touch wasn't rough, wasn't forceful. It didn't command, didn't demand. It was simply there. Atlas. Lily's voice was calm, unwavering. You don't have to fight. Atlas faltered. The world around him blurred, his heartbeat pounding in his ears. The past and the present collided. Two versions of himself warring for control, the cage, the ring, the voice barking orders, and then Lily, standing beside him, unafraid. She didn't see the fire burning in his eyes. She didn't see the way his muscles coiled, ready to strike, but she felt him, felt the tremor in his body, the hesitation, the conflict. "You're not there anymore." Her voice was barely above a whisper, but it cut through the haze. "You don't have to do this." The thief took a slow step back, gripping the purse like a lifeline. His pulse was visible in his throat, his breath ragged with fear. Atlas turned his gaze back to the man. But this time, his eyes were different. Not a predator's, a protector's. He did not lunge. He did not bite. He simply stepped in front of Lily, planting himself between her and the danger. His growl deepened, not a threat, but a warning, a promise. The thief hesitated for only a second longer before making his decision. He dropped the purse, then he ran. Atlas stood still, watching until the footsteps faded into the distance. His heart still thundered, his instincts still screamed at him to chase, to finish what had begun. But he didn't, because this time, he had chosen differently. Lily knelt beside him, reaching for the purse with one hand, the other resting lightly on his back. "See?" she murmured, fingers curling gently into his fur. "You're not what they made you." Atlas exhaled, his body relaxing beneath her touch. For the first time in his life, he had won a battle without shedding blood. And for the first time, victory felt like something he could live with. The news spread faster than wildfire. A blind girl and her Pitbull, a dog with a past soaked in blood, walking together, untethered, in complete trust. A predator turned protector, stepping between his person and danger, standing down when told to, proving that he was more than what the world had made him. Some saw a miracle, a second chance, a story of redemption, but others saw a ticking time bomb. The headlines varied. Some called Atlas a hero, a symbol of resilience. Others were more unforgiving. Can a killer be reformed? Once a fighter, always a fighter? Debates erupted across news stations, social media threads filled with clashing opinions. That dog should have been put down years ago. It's only a matter of time before it snaps. She's blind. How would she even know if it turned on her? Lily ignored it. She didn't need strangers to tell her who Atlas was. She had felt it in every step they took together, in the steady warmth of his presence at her side. She had heard it in the way his breathing slowed when she ran her hands over his scars. But the world was not so easily convinced. One evening, there was a knock at the door. Atlas lifted his head from where he lay curled near the couch, ears pricking at the sound. Lily had just been making tea, the soft clinking of porcelain filling the small kitchen. She hesitated for only a second before setting the cup down and walking toward the door, her fingers trailing lightly along the furniture as she moved. She didn't need to see to know that something was wrong. There was a shift in the air, a tightness, a presence that made Atlas rise to his feet. He didn't growl, but his body was tense, his instincts whispering warnings. Lily opened the door. A man stood on the porch. His voice was polite, but his tone carried an edge. "Miss Dawson?" "Yes?" "I'm with the city's animal control division. I'd like to have a word with you about your dog." Lily's grip on the door tightened. "His name is Atlas." The man hesitated. "Yes, that's what I came to talk about." He exhaled, shifting his clipboard. "We've received multiple concerns about his past. Given his history in dogfighting, there are people who believe he poses a risk, especially given your condition." Lily stiffened. "My condition?" The officer cleared his throat, suddenly uncomfortable. "What I mean is, given that you cannot physically see his behavior, there's concern about whether you'd be able to react if something were to happen." Lily felt Atlas press against her leg, a silent reassurance. She reached down, running her fingers gently over his head, feeling the warmth beneath her palm. "So what are you saying?" she asked, her voice carefully measured. The officer shifted. "We're requesting that Atlas be surrendered to us for further evaluation. We need to assess whether he's truly safe for domestic placement." A sharp silence filled the air. Atlas didn't move. Lily felt the stillness in him, the way his body had gone rigid, not in aggression, but in understanding. He had heard this before. He had been through this before. She clenched her jaw. "No." The officer's expression darkened. "Miss Dawson?" "No." Her fingers curled into Atlas's fur, not in restraint but in defiance. "You don't know him." The man sighed, adjusting his stance. "Miss, I understand that you've formed an attachment to the animal, but you have to see reason." "I don't have to see anything to know what's real," she snapped. Atlas stayed close, his massive frame steady against her, but his eyes never left the officer. He recognized the scent of authority, of control, of people deciding his fate without ever knowing who he really was. Lily exhaled, forcing her voice to steady. "You're making a judgment based on his scars, not his actions." The officer hesitated. "You think because he was forced to fight, that's all he can ever be. But you weren't there when he let go of his past. You weren't there when he chose to walk beside me instead of run away. You weren't there when he protected me without hurting anyone. You weren't there when he woke up from nightmares, and I had to remind him that he wasn't in that cage anymore." Her voice softened, but the strength in it remained. "You see a fighter. I feel a heart that never got the chance to be anything else." The officer looked away for a moment, his fingers tightening around his clipboard. He exhaled through his nose as if considering something, then shook his head. "I'm sorry, Miss Dawson." A second shadow appeared beside him. Another officer. Lily's pulse quickened. Atlas didn't move. He didn't resist when they clipped the leash onto his collar. He didn't pull away, didn't growl. He simply turned his head, his golden brown eyes locking onto Lily's face, as if memorizing her in case this was the last time. Lily's throat tightened. "Number, please." The first officer sighed. "It's just a temporary assessment. If he passes, he'll be allowed to return to you." Lies. She heard the hesitation in his voice. She knew how these things worked. Atlas knew it too, and yet he didn't fight. Not this time. He didn't look back as they led him away. He only walked forward like a prisoner who had already accepted the sentence before it was spoken aloud. The door closed. The house felt empty. Lily remained standing there for a long time, her hands clenched at her sides, her breath shallow. She had spent her whole life navigating darkness, but she had never known it like this, the kind that settled deep in her bones, like a world that had just lost its warmth. She pressed a hand to her chest, her fingers curling into the fabric of her sweater. Atlas was gone, and this time, she couldn't see the way back to him. The night was quiet, too quiet. Lily lay in her bed, the blankets pulled up to her shoulders, the world around her wrapped in the stillness of midnight. But it was not peaceful. The silence was wrong, hollow, as if something had been torn from the very air she breathed. Atlas was gone. She reached for the empty space where he used to sleep, her fingers curling into the sheets. The room felt colder without him. The entire apartment did. She had spent the last few days calling, begging, fighting to get him back. Each time she was met with the same response. "He is under evaluation." Lies. She knew Atlas. She knew his heart, his soul. He wasn't dangerous. He wasn't some unpredictable beast waiting to snap. But no one else could feel him the way she could. She turned onto her side, letting out a slow, shaky breath. Somewhere, Atlas was alone again. in a cage, surrounded by people who feared him. Did he think she had abandoned him? Did he believe she had given up? "I'll bring you home." That was her last thought before sleep finally found her. And then, the world went up in flames. At the animal control facility, the air was thick with the scent of disinfectant and the low murmur of restless dogs. Most had already settled into uneasy sleep, but Atlas lay awake, his ears perked, his senses stretched out beyond the cold steel of his cage. Then he heard it. The distant scream of sirens, urgent, frantic, growing louder by the second. Something was wrong. His body tensed, muscles coiling as a new scent hit the air. Smoke. And then he heard her name. It wasn't spoken, wasn't clear, but it was there. A whisper in the chaos. A pull deep in his chest. Lily. Atlas surged forward, his powerful body slamming against the cage door. The metal groaned under the pressure, but it held firm. He growled, a deep guttural sound, his mind flashing back to every time he had been trapped, forced to wait for someone else to decide his fate. Not this time. Not when she needed him. With one last violent lunge, he threw himself against the door. The hinges snapped, the cage swung open, and Atlas ran. The streets blurred beneath him, his paws pounding against the pavement, his breath coming in short, sharp bursts. He didn't know how he knew where to go, only that he had to get there. Then he saw it. Flames curled out of Lily's apartment windows, black smoke pouring into the sky like a living thing. The building glowed a sickening shade of orange, sirens wailing as firefighters rushed to battle the inferno. Atlas didn't stop. He barreled past the barriers, past the shouting voices, past the hands that tried to grab him. Someone yelled, "Get that dog!" But he was already gone, disappearing into the flames. The heat hit him first, a wall of searing pain that wrapped around his body. Smoke burned his lungs, but he pushed forward, nose low, searching. Then he heard it. A faint cough. A ragged, shaking breath. Atlas found her. Lily lay crumpled on the floor, one hand weakly grasping for something, for him. His heart slammed against his ribs as he reached her, pressing his nose to her face, whining, nudging, begging her to move. She stirred. Barely. "Atlas?" Her voice was thin, fragile, his chest clenched. He had no time. He grabbed the fabric of her sleeve gently between his teeth and began to pull. The flames roared, pressing closer. His fur sizzled, pain licking at his skin. But he didn't stop. Atlas had spent his whole life fighting to survive, fighting because he was told to, fighting because it was the only thing he knew. But this wasn't survival. This wasn't a command. This time, he was fighting for something that mattered. Step by step, dragging her, shielding her, burning for her, Atlas moved through the smoke. He would not fail, not this time, not again. Then, air. The cold night hit him like a punch as he stumbled free of the wreckage. He barely made it 2 steps before his legs gave out. Strong hands grabbed Lily, lifting her away, voices shouting orders. "She's breathing! We've got her!" But Atlas didn't hear the rest. His body was on fire, pain spreading through every nerve, his vision swimming. He had done it. He had saved her. And then, darkness. The next time Atlas opened his eyes, the world was quiet again. But this time, it was the right kind of quiet. Software, warm, safe. A blanket lay over his back, and the scent of antiseptic was strong. But beneath it, beneath all of it, was something else. Lavender. Lily. A weak, shaking hand brushed over his head, trembling fingers tracing the scars she knew so well. "You came back for me," she whispered. Atlas exhaled, eyes fluttering closed beneath her touch. For the first time in his life, he had chosen to fight. Not for survival, not because he was forced to, but because he had something worth saving. Because he was not a killer. Because he was not a monster. Because, for the first time, he was home. Sunlight streamed through the hospital window, casting a golden glow across the room. The sterile scent of antiseptic lingered in the air, but beneath it was something softer, familiar. Lavender. Lily stirred, her fingers twitching against the crisp white sheets. There was a dull ache in her body, a weight in her chest that made each breath feel thick, heavy. The last thing she remembered was fire. Heat curling around her skin, smoke clawing at her lungs. And then, Atlas. Her heart clenched. Atlas! Her voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. Something shifted beside her. A warm, solid presence, a quiet breath, the soft thud of a tail against the floor. Then the feeling of fur beneath her trembling fingers. Relief crashed over her so forcefully, it left her dizzy. "You're here," she whispered, her hand pressing against his side, feeling the steady rise and fall of his breathing. Atlas didn't move for a long moment, as if making sure this wasn't a dream. Then he nudged his head under her hand, exhaling a deep, contented sigh. A weak chuckle escaped her lips. "You saved me." Atlas rumbled low in his throat, something close to a huff, as if to say, "Of course I did." For the first time since the fire, Lily allowed herself to breathe freely. But beneath the relief, beneath the joy of knowing Atlas was still here, there was fear, a deep, gnawing fear that wouldn't quite leave her. She knew how close she had come to losing him, not to the flames, not to the smoke, but to the world that had tried to take him away. Her grip on his fur tightened. The idea of waking up in a world without Atlas, of reaching for him and finding nothing but air, it was unbearable. And yet, it had almost happened. Would they try again? Would someone somewhere look at him and only see the past? Would they ever truly be free? The door creaked open and the sound of footsteps followed. Atlas lifted his head, his body instantly alert. Not tense, not afraid, just aware, protecting her. Always. "Lily?" A familiar voice, one of the shelter workers. "How are you feeling?" "Alive," she answered softly, running her fingers along Atlas's back. His fur was singed in places, but he was here. That was all that mattered. The woman exhaled, relief evident in her tone. "He's been waiting for you to wake up. Refused to leave your side." Lily smiled. "Sounds about right." There was a pause. Then the woman spoke again, her voice gentle. "I thought you should hear it from me first. After what happened, what Atlas did, he's been officially classified as a service dog for you." Lily's breath caught. The woman continued. "No more evaluations. No more threats of him being taken. He's yours. Permanently." For a moment, Lily couldn't speak. She had fought for this moment, dreamed of it. But to hear the words spoken aloud, to know that no one could take him away again. She turned toward Atlas, brushing her hand over the scars along his face. "You hear that?" she murmured. "You're free." Atlas only blinked at her, as if he had known that all along. Days passed, then weeks. The burns healed, the bruises faded, and for the first time, Atlas and Lily walked through town without fear. The whispers were still there, but they were different now. That's him. That's the dog who saved her. He's not a monster. He's a hero. Atlas ignored the voices, but this time, he didn't have to hide from them. He walked beside Lily, not because of a leash, not because he was forced to, but because he chose to. No one pulled her away from him. No one hesitated when she let him guide her. There were no chains anymore. No cages, just trust, just freedom. Lily could feel the difference in Atlas's movements, a lightness that had never been there before. His steps were no longer weighed down by hesitation, by the lingering shadows of the past. For so long, he had walked with his head low, waiting for someone to take everything away again. But not today. Today, Atlas walked with his head high. They reached the top of a quiet hill, where the breeze was soft and the world stretched wide around them. Lily took a deep breath, feeling the warmth of the sun on her face. Atlas sat beside her, silent, strong. Her hand found his fur, but this time she wasn't reaching for comfort. She was reaching for the truth she had always known. She turned her face toward him. "You know," she murmured, "no one can change the past." Atlas didn't move, but his ears flicked as he listened. Lily smiled softly, running her fingers over the scars along his back, marks of a life he had left behind. "But we can choose how we live today." Atlas exhaled, long and slow, before pressing his head gently against her hand. And for the first time in his life, he did not look back. He had finally found home. As the sun dipped lower, Lily sat in silence, feeling the steady warmth of Atlas beside her. She thought about the dog he had been, trapped, broken, forced into violence, a creature made to be feared. And now, she felt the dog he had become, steadfast, loyal, free. She knew that there would still be whispers, there would still be people who refused to see past his scars, but they didn't matter. Atlas didn't need the world's acceptance. He only needed this moment, sitting beside the person who had seen him for what he truly was. Not a fighter, not a monster, but a protector, a friend, a survivor. And for the first time, Atlas believed it too. Lily tilted her head toward him, a small smile tugging at her lips. "You ready to go home?" Atlas didn't need to be asked twice. As they stood together, walking side by side into the golden light of the setting sun, one thing was certain. He had finally found where he belonged. Some say we cannot escape our past, that we are bound to the scars life has carved into us. But perhaps the past does not define us. Perhaps it is what we choose to do with our second chances that matters most. Atlas was once a prisoner, a tool of violence, a creature the world had discarded. But in the end, he was never a killer. He was a protector, a fighter, not for survival, but for love. And Lily? She didn't need to see Atlas to know his soul. She reminded us of something we often forget. The heart sees what the eyes cannot. What do you think? Can the broken truly be healed? Do we all deserve a second chance? Share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear your perspective. And if this story moved you, subscribe to Vale Marks. Every new subscriber is a reminder that stories like this matter, that the world still craves tales of hope, love, and redemption. Your support fuels our creativity, helping us bring you deeper, richer, and even more meaningful narratives. Because sometimes all it takes is one story to change the way we see the world. Thank you for watching. Until next time, stay inspired, stay hopeful, and never stop believing in second chances.